And speaking of just because you can doesn't mean you should. Should we talk about the incident? Are you well?
I'm all right. We're going to talk about Porcupine Tree, aren't we?
We are going to talk about Porcupine Tree, which will be interesting because it's a long time since I've listened to any Porcupine Tree.
And also, the thing with Porcupine Tree is there's a lot of it, isn't there?
There is. There's a lot of it.
A lot of tree action.
I mean, you've got the studio albums, and there are what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 studio albums, but millions of live albums,
and the tapes and the singles, Moonlight.
Yeah, all sorts of extra stuff. So
we'll start off. Perhaps if we go. So we've got the early stuff like Tarquin Seaweed Farm, wasn't there? Which was
yes.
Love, Death and Mussolini, and the Nostalgia Factory. Now, most of this stuff was collected on On the Sunday of Life, wasn't it?
Yes.
So that's kind of where the all that stuff ended up.
That's where the story starts, I suppose.
Yeah. So, do you want to talk about your history of Porcupine? How did you discover Porcupine Tree, David?
Well, the first Porcupine Tree album I heard was actually the Coma Divine Live album, which has got a whole bunch of stuff on from albums like The Sky Moves Sideways and some of the sort of the more delirium-based stuff.
That was the Signify tour, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
I like that one. That's really cool.
That I think was probably what got me. That was what got me sort of exploring them. So from there, I went to Signify and The Sky Moves Sideways, which I really like. It's sort of quite Floydy type of approach. And
did you work your way back to Voice 34 and all that stuff?
Yes, and all those sort of things. I really like Voice 34. Actually, it's brilliant.
I was going to say. So I'd say when I discovered Porcupine Tree was the Voice 34 single on vinyl. And I was into sort of Osric Tentacles. A lot of my mates are into sort of that free sort of hippie scene. So sort of Osric, Gong, Mavish, Hawkwind, Magic Mushroom Band, and there's all sort of like all those sort of that kind of, I suppose, sort of space rock crusty scene, right?
Sort of psychedelic-y.
Yeah. And I thought, Porcupine Tree were a psychedelic crusty band, part of all that Osric-y business, right? But and then they did Voice 34, and I kind of forgot about them. And I was off into Radioactive and DJ Shadow and, all that stuff, indie rock and Jellyfish and lots of different sorts of music. And then I kind of forgot about Porcupine Tree until about 2008.
Right.
Someone said to me that Porcupine Tree were playing the Royal Albert Hall. I think it was 2010, yes. which just seemed, it was as likely as Osric Tentacles headlining Wembley Stadium. It was
a bit of a disconnect there.
I literally could not believe it, because this was a band that I thought, was along the lines of Magic Mushroom Band, or one of the bands you see at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at a space rock festival, and they suddenly developed this incredible fan base, which I thought was brilliant for them. And so that's kind of when I went back and listened to them again, and I was hugely impressed. They achieved all this stuff, but they were so under the radar, weren't they?
They were for a long time. I suppose my experience is similar in a way, in that I listened to those early albums, to those Delirium albums, and really enjoyed those. And then I didn't for a while. I was off listening to other things. It was round about the time I was sort of getting back into that their prog music. I know, and beware, and doing all that. And then I saw that they had a new album out, and the new album was In Absentia. And I went and listened to that and thought, this is nothing like the stuff that I was listening to before. It was like a tale of two bands almost, there wasn't that long in time.
This is the thing, isn't it? So kind of they had several different eras, didn't they?
Yes.
So let's go through the album. So if we go on to On the Sunday of Life, which is probably the album I've listened to least.
Yes, me too, actually.
And it's kind of very much of that psych, space rock. I like Jupiter Island. It's got an almost Syd Barrett-y early sort of gong sort of feel to it. Radioactive Toy is a really good song. Sort of Floydy sort of thing. So there's lots of good stuff on there, but it's probably the one I've listened to least. It's all right, but it's basically a compilation of the cassettes and demos and recordings,
early material.
Yeah, exactly. So the band is essentially a Stephen Wilson solo album from when he was a younger chap. And it's all right. What do you think, David?
Again, I've hardly listened to it. I mean, Radioactive Toy is the standout one, I suppose, for me. It was on that live album, Coma Divine, which was what sort of drew me to it. And of those early ones, it was the one I think I acquired last. But yeah, it's fine. That's one which I might put on and not really listen to. I know that's sort of damning with faint praise.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like Delirium era stuff. And I like that sort of space rocky sort of stuff. And then around this time, you had the Voyage 34 single, which I absolutely love.
Yes,
I think that's one of the best things Stephen Wilson's ever been involved in. And it's got a real Osrix. It's got the guitar line from that Pink Floyd song, hasn't it? From The Wall. Which one?
Run Like Hell. Yeah. Very, very similar.
When they've got the echo.
Yeah.
It's got that little bit of guitar in it. I like it.
It chugs away.
It's a great tune. I mean, I'd be over the moon if I'd written that. It's really great. Sort of Up the Downstairs was the album around the same time. Up Downstairs, not Downstairs, which is kind of a similar sort of space rocky. The crossover between perhaps the Orb and Floyd is probably the thing I'd think of with that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's the Floyd influence was something which appealed to me because
definitely.
I was a big Floyd fan when I was in my teens, so it was quite nice to sort of hear someone doing that sort of thing in a competent fashion.
I like the ravey bits in it as well. They're really cool. It's got that sort of Warby sort of thing. There's definitely a bit of Osrix in there as well, who I love.
Yeah.
Fantastic fan. So, yeah, that's a good one. I like that one. I've listened to that one a few more times, and, that's a really good album. So then we're on to Dark Side. The Sky Moves Sideways.
Sky Moves Sideways, which is that's like sort of peak Floyd for me.
Well, it's very much a Floyd influenced album.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's one of those ones. It's very Floydy, but I really like it. And I like there's a couple of bits where they do go into a sort of ravey early 90s rave thing that's quite cool as well.
Yeah.
And once again, I say if I'd make an album like that, I'd be very, very proud of it.
You'd be happy. Yeah.
Got some great stuff in there. And but I think was this the one where the band started to play on stuff? I'm not sure.
That was when they were really started becoming a band, and also when they started doing live shows, sort of more coherent live shows as a band, I guess is the way to put it.
Like I say, it is very Floydy, but it's also very, very well done as well. I mean, Stephen Wilson's very good at doing stuff that sounds like other people, because I suppose from his background, he used to do adverts, didn't he? So his job was to recreate other artists.
Right.
So, his job would be Metallica one week and he'd be Steps the next week. And I think,
and he's a very good producer. So
brilliant. Yeah. I
mean, you're not going to get anything that doesn't sound good from.
No, it's a great sounding album. And if you enjoy Pink Floyd or you want to hear something that's slightly modern take on Floyd, I think it's a great record and you really enjoy it. So, so I think the next is Signify next.
Yeah, so I think of this and Stupid Dream in sort of more or less the same kind of as being very similar, and they're probably my two favourite Porcupine Tree albums. Yeah. Simply because I like the songs and I like the atmospheres and the feel on them. They're really gelling as a band at this point with Signify.
Yeah, I like that. It's cool.
And it was before it all got a bit kind of metal, which sort of came later on.
Well, I think this point, I mean, Colin Edwin, I really like Colin Edwin's bass playing because he's not a prog bass player at all. He's more like a jar wobble sort of, almost dubby sort of little runs. Sort of, I played with a bass player, my mate Dan Wilson, who played a bit like Colin Edwin.
Yeah,
so it's sort of little dubby sort of riffs and stuff. And I think he's a really great bass player, Colin. He's very underrated as a musician, I think, as well. And he's somebody, that probably people don't know. And obviously, they've got a very strong rhythm section with him and Chris Maitland on this record.
Chris Maitland,
who's a great drummer as well. So, do you prefer Chris Maitland or Gavin Harrison? Very different.
Terrible confession is I don't really listen to drummers that much.
No, I think the only thing I found with drums is like the drums tend to set the feel for the record. So
yes,
you couldn't imagine John Bonham playing on a Beatles record, or
no,
and I love Ringo Starr and I love John Bonham, but they're different things, aren't they? So,
but I think I'd notice if the drumming was crap. I'm that sort of listener.
Right, yeah.
But no, I think they're both fine musicians. I mean, obviously Gavin Harrison's the one who gets all the props because of his long-standing career as a teacher and a writer, as well as actually as a drummer.
And I mean, I think they're both great for different reasons, and I think that's the best way to look at it, isn't it? That
yes.
So Signify, the title, the instrumental title track, I absolutely love. I think that's a fantastic.
Yeah.
And
I think they're often at their best when they're doing instrumental stuff, if I'm honest.
They're a really good instrumental band, I think. And I mean, largely their early material, up to Signify, they were largely an instrumental band that had a bit of singing rather than
yes.
And then they just sort of became a band that had a lot more vocals later on, didn't they? But they were starting to get more into songs, and it was with things like with Stupid Dream and then Lightbulb Sun that came after it. I thought they're becoming more of a song band. That was it. So let's move on to those now. But I really like Waiting on Signify.
Yes,
I like the title track Signify a lot. But I think it's a really, really. I think that's probably one of their strongest records, because it's a bit weird. Because sometimes I think Porcupine Tree albums aren't very well sequenced. They don't necessarily put the best tracks in the right places, and sometimes they let themselves. We don't realise how good some of the tracks are because they don't sequence them that well. But let's have a look at Stupid Dream next. So 3 years between this, so they moved up to a slightly bigger label. So they were on Delirium. They were very much part of that Dog and a Bit of String, Osrixy sort of psychedelic psych rock thing. So then they moved to Kscope. But this was the very early days of Kscope, before it was the sort of prog monolith that it is now.
Yes.
It was very much a division of Snapper Music, which is kind of a reissue label, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so this is the one that's I think is very post Radiohead.
Yeah.
It's definitely got a bit of a touch of the OK Computers about it.
It's because it starts off with Even Less, which is like sort of, it's like a song that Radiohead never wrote in some ways.
But it's got some very strong material on it. It's got Tinto Brass, which is really good. It's got Piano Lessons, which I read is a great pop song. So I mean, when he does write some really good sort of pop tunes, doesn't he? This is the pop era of the band. So,
and that's what I was talking about when I was saying moving more into kind of sort of songs. And I think he writes really good sort of hooks. I mean, even you think of the stuff on the most recent his most recent solo album, which we talked about a little while ago.
When all the prog fans threw their toys out the pram, getting upset about Stephen Wilson going prog, it was like going pop. Sorry, it's like, have you not heard any of this? I
know. Listen to the back catalogue.
It's like, I mean, these two albums in particular are really poppy, aren't they? They've got some Piano Lessons. Is almost sort of like. That it's very late 90s sort of MTV sort of, or MTV2 sort of thing. You know what I mean?
You could put this sort of stuff on those sort of outlets, and it would work perfectly well.
Yeah. I think the issue was at the time they just didn't have the promo muscle behind them for people to hear it, did they? They wouldn't. They were still on a relatively small label. And it's that kind of they didn't have the muscle to be a Radiohead or a that sort of band, and
it's four rather nondescript looking blokes as well. Which
they weren't in with the cool kids, were they?
No,
they weren't Supergrass or someone like that. You know what I mean? It was like But I don't think the music they were making was particularly far away from Supergrass or Radiohead or any of those bands that were making sort of dallying between the line between sort of pop music and prog. I mean, Supergrass's records around the same time were very similar in the sound, weren't they?
Yeah, I did. Because we're getting onto a little bit of a divergence here, talking about people like Supergrass, but their album "In It for the Money," I think it was called.
Great, yeah, it's great.
I love that record.
Me too. Yeah,
They've gone from doing their first album, which was all the sort of the chirpy, chappy, rip hop type stuff, to doing an album which I think was actually really quite substantial.
But I think one of the things as well at the end of the 90s, I think a lot of people took on Radiohead and Jeff Buckley, and they were kind of massive influences on, certainly on my generation. I mean, Stephen Wilson's 8-9 years older than me. So, I mean, it's 8 years, something like that. But I mean, obviously a little bit older than me. But I think, for my people my age, I think Jeff Buckley was a huge thing because you could show the sort of emotional intensity you could get out of rock music but then you had everybody ripped it off. So you had your Muses and your Coldplays and all those guys. You know what I mean? Yeah.
With my age, it was with my era. For people of my age, it's more the sort of the Nick Drake type of approach.
Yeah.
If you're looking for not particularly cheerful music, that's where you go.
Well, I think the 90s was another time when people did rediscover people like Nick Drake as well. I mean, I was listening to a lot of Nick Drake in the 90s. I was really into, that sort of sitting around being miserable music. But then you realise life's too short. You haven't got time to be miserable. So
you can't spend your entire life listening to Pink Floyd.
It's very much a young person's game. That so
absolutely.
So we're on to Light Bulb Sun next, which is kind of more of the same, isn't it?
Yes, I think of that sort of those two as being a bit of a almost like companion pieces, very similar before they had a sort of a change in approach.
And I think it's got a song I don't really like on it, which is I'm not going to be. This is probably the only time I'm going to say anything. I don't, most of the time I think, probably something that I perhaps don't get, or but I can't stand Four Chords That Made a Million. It makes me, I find it reminds me a little bit of it was a Cooler Shaker or something like that. It's like,
oh goodness, yeah.
It's really like, it's got that kind of. I mean, I quite like some of the Cooler Shaker stuff. It's not, I'm not being disrespectful to Cooler Shaker. Some of the stuff's all right, but I just don't like that song at all. But I like Lightbulb, something that's brilliant. She's moved on, brilliant track as well. Russia on Ice. I mean, once again, it's another album that's really well made. Just shows the amount of talent in the band, doesn't it?
Yes, and lest we forget, their keyboard player has got a very long-standing career. Originally as a member of Japan. Which, I mean, they were an interesting band. Started off as sort of, a bunch of lads who were sort of brought to market because they looked pretty, but there was a lot of substance to some of their music. And Barbieri is a masterpiece of that sort of
sound design.
You don't notice he's there sort of keyboards, but you would notice if he wasn't there. Yeah.
He's good at sound design, isn't he? He's really good at soundscapes, and like the intro to a lot of those the intros to a lot of those songs. They've got those sort of big soundscapey things going on. I think a lot of that's the sound design element that Barbieri brings in. He's not a whittler, is he? He's not a stupid sort of
not at all.
Player, but I really like. He's more from the sound design, but that's a really useful thing to have in a band, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've seen him because I've seen him play live a couple of times as well with people. So he was he played keyboards on a David Sylvian tour, and absolutely sort of made the sound with that. It was a lot of it was him. Well, him and David Torn sort of blasting guitar solos over the whole thing. But
I like David Torn; he's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, he that was a crazy gig.
I don't know that much about Dave. What I've heard is really good. So, Strings on Lightbulb Song, Lightbulb Sun by David of the Mighty XTC.
Yes,
who we like very much, don't we? So
we do.
He's a very talented guy. But the string arrangements are really good on this. Actually, I think Dave's awesome, isn't he? So all his Last Chance to Evacuate Planet Earth got some really good stuff on it. So. This one as well is a little bit more creeping metal as well, isn't there?
Yes, it's starting to come in there, although I think it didn't really sort of
it's the next
come
one.
in until the next one, yeah.
So should we move on to In Absentia now?
Yes, which was the first one that I heard. Was this the first one that Gavin Harrison was on? I think it was.
Yeah, this is the arrival of Gavin Harrison. This is the move to a major label.
Yes.
Lava, which I think was also part of Atlantic. I think so. But they were on a major label. They had some money. They recorded in the States. And it's the arrival of Gavin Harrison and some insane Gavin Harrison drumming on this.
Yes.
So whilst I like Chris Maitland's drumming a lot as well, Gavin Harrison does these weird cross rhythm things.
That's his trademark, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really odd because he'd be doing like one time signature on there and he'll roll it across. It's just, I mean, I'm not a drummer. I don't really understand what he's doing, but it's, and the songs, the songs are really strong on this. I mean, Trains, the song, Trains and Blackest Eyes, probably the best to opener of any Porcupine Tree record.
I think Blackest Eyes that's an amazing song.
Right?
That was. You can imagine the shock of me. Oh, new album from Porcupine Tree.
Yeah.
Having heard all this other stuff, and then you're basically sort of slapped around the face with Blackest Eyes, and it's got some really quite strange and creepy lyrics in it as well. But there we go.
Interesting, yeah. So during this period, he seems to have a bit of an obsession with serial killers.
He does. Yes,
there seems to be a lot of stuff about serial because the more you listen to the lyrics, and weirdly, it's one of the strongest lyrically strongest albums he's made.
Yes,
because he hasn't got any cringes on there. Where you don't think, ooh, but it's like some of his lyrics. But lyrically, it's really strong. And Trains is such a great record. I remember we were doing a gig and someone put Trains on before we went on. And I was listening, it's like, this is one of the most remarkably, such a good song. I mean, it's Radiohead level songwriting. It's that good. It's one of those things I think, it's got everything. It's got a clever rhythmic part, but also in the context of a really strong pop song. The hooks are really strong. The lyrics are really good. It's got there's so much about it that's really, really impressive. And it's like, something like Trains, it sounds like he spent a lot of time on it and really refined it lyrically and musically to create this sort of really interesting sound. So what's your favourite on this one, David?
I think it might be Blackest Eyes, but I also really like Gravity Eyelids.
Yeah,
I love the sort of the feel to that one.
More laid back sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah. The reason I keep putting my glasses on and taking them off again is that I'm really bad at remembering which songs are on which albums, so I'm having to look at it.
Well, I kind of just go, like I say, when I went back after hearing Fear of a Blank Planet and being hugely impressed. So my favourite run of Porcupine Tree stuff is the early stuff, 40-34, like, and then I really like this album, the following album, and then Fear of a Blank Planet. So that kind of that run of albums I find is probably their strongest. It's their Ben's OK Computer Kid A sort of thing. It's their kind of three greatest records in a row, isn't it? So let's so what's next? So we've got Deadwing, which is Deadwing's kind of more once again a similar album to the previous one, isn't it?
Yes, it's sort of into that sort of area. There are some brilliant songs. My favourite song on Deadwing is Mellotron Scratch, which I think is superb. I don't know why. I just think it's really interesting.
I think Arriving Somewhere But Not Here is probably the most one that...
that's the one that most people know, isn't it?
I love that one, yeah. But the title track's really good. Lazarus is really good. Really strong album again. But once again, it was a funny thing because I think Porcupine Tree are much better thought of now than they were at the time, aren't they?
Yes. They had their following.
Yeah.
But I think it's often the way, isn't it? When it's not available to you anymore, everyone's saying how brilliant it was.
Yeah, definitely.
It's the whole sort of nostalgia thing.
But I think also at the time, like we were talking about this earlier, but there wasn't many bands doing, prog metal as a genre. There wasn't Hakens or people like there was Dream Theater.
It was Dream Theater,
who I don't really get, to be honest. He's not my cup of tea. Or Porcupine Tree, who I do really like, and I think Porcupine Tree came from interesting metal. And I think there's the sort of Meshuggah and bands like that. The sort of the genty metal sort of stuff.
Yes,
that's influenced, and alongside sort of Floyd and King Crimson as well. And Radiohead as well, and Jeff Buckley and things like that. So to me, it's got a lot more interesting than they're not just showing off the chops. I think that's
the thing. There's an interesting kind of there's an interesting comparison to be drawn between Porcupine Tree and Dream Theater in their approach. In that Dream Theater are these guys who all went to music college, and learned to play incredibly well. They're all fantastic technicians, and when they're on point and writing good songs, they're really good. But sometimes they miss spectacularly. So, whereas Porcupine Tree, with Stephen Wilson, who by this time I think would say he was primarily a songwriter. He doesn't make any sort of any claims to be the world's greatest guitarist or anything like that, or the world's greatest singer. He's fine guitar player, as you hear on his records. And the other musicians in the band are that they're good, solid musicians with ideas and musicality, rather than being very gifted technicians. Except, of course, Gavin Harrison, who is kind of both.
Insane, he's probably the best sort of that style of drummer in the world, isn't he?
Yes.
I mean, because we saw him with Crimson, didn't we, David?
Yes, him and two of the drummers.
He was amazing. Available drummers at the evening.
It's when the other two.
It was really great.
The really. I remember sort of. I've seen that Crimson lineup that variant of it 3 times now, and what I thought was quite amazing was you'd have all 3 of them doing their thing at various points in the show. Then the other 2 would stop with Gavin Harrison keeps going, and you don't really notice that much difference in the intensity of the drumming.
It was he's phenomenal. He really is a phenomenal drummer. So so I think it's an interesting point you made earlier. Actually, the difference between British bands and American bands. I think American musicians tend to be more formally trained and more competent. Yes. Whereas British musicians tend to be more about ideas and trying to get the idea across. So, like you, Dave, I mean, most of the guitarists and musicians are probably well known from the UK, haven't been to music college.
No, they're probably all self-taught.
They're all self-taught. But they tend to come from the art school background. The old thing of the art college, Pink Floyd performed at an art college. The Stones were made at art college. And there's that thing of, punk came from the art colleges, and it's very much about ideas rather than competence. Yeah. Because, a lot of British, same with Radiohead as well, they're not the most competent musicians in the world, perhaps, but they're good at being interesting. Whereas I hear something, when I was particularly at Rosfest, the standard of the musicianship is insane. They're so good. Yeah. I mean, they're just Americans, generally speaking, much better than us.
They're incredible musicians.
I mean, and I think it's that thing of music's very much part of the curriculum in American schools. Yes. And there's that whole sort of drumline thing and this whole thing. Whereas in Britain, music is something you go in a music session you go into the music room and you make paper planes, or you might go around the back and smoke a fag or do something like that. Or you might beat up somebody in the corridor, or I don't remember learning anything in music at school, apart from how to hide in a cupboard when people are going to beat you up, that sort of thing.
We just listened to records.
Well, exactly,
like classical records. That was all we did. Yeah, but there was some attempt to try and get everyone to learn an instrument, but it was pretty much a waste of time. And I think that probably says a lot about the way that music, as you say, is part of the curriculum. In the US. I mean, here music is sort of systemically almost ignored. It's interesting, actually. A little while ago I was talking to Andy Edwards about this. Drummer, of course, who was big in the prog world. His band Rainer made a really great album last year. But he's a music teacher. That's his job, and he was talking about how funding is often a problem, and music education is something which not a huge amount of value is put by, which is a real shame, because it's about more than the music. It's about a wider understanding of culture and the arts, I think.
we live in a country that doesn't really appreciate it a lot. So
no, they're not interested in it. A lot of people
been deliberately erased. Anyway, we're going to get political and we get in trouble. So in terms of guest players in this, so Adrian Ballou, who played a couple of parts, and Mikael Ackerfeld from Opeth, who was another band around this time. They were crossing. So while Porcupine Tree were coming from proggy alternative rock across to metal, Opeth were going the other way, weren't they? So there was this
metal towards prog, yeah.
So I think, if you go to, I think a lot of Porcupine Tree's fan base came from Opeth fans at this point. I think because Stephen Wilson produced Opeth, I think a lot of those guys came across and, came across on the metal boat. And metal fans are great because I grew up as a metal fan. That's my world. So yeah. And I think that's one of the most loyal fan bases you can ever have.
Very loyal fan base.
Those guys coming across, definitely a lot of that big. So if you go to see Stephen Wilson, there's two types of fans. There's the younger Opeth dudes, and then the older fans from the prog era, aren't there? And that's kind of the two sorts of groups of fans at the audience, So. And I think a lot of people came over from Team Opeth, and Opeth were doing some really. We'll have to do an Opeth one as well with these.
I'll have to go. Does that mean I have to listen to their albums?
Yeah, no. I like Carcass, didn't I? So I like all the other stuff.
I suppose it does, doesn't it?
I like all the death metal stuff. But they're a band I only discovered fairly recently, and I really like all their shouty, grunty stuff. So which is possibly a lot. So let's move on from Deadwing. So I think Deadwing, once again, on a major, didn't quite have the impact they hoped for, didn't really have the breakthrough, even though I think they're influencing lots of different musicians and like you say, cross-pollinating between different genres, weren't they? So
yes,
which is a really interesting thing. So let's move towards Fear of a Blank Planet, which I really love. I think it's probably the Porcupine. If I'm going to listen to a Porcupine Tree album, Fear of a Blank Planet is the one. The one that
you'll give a spin. I think this I think was probably sort of their last album, which I thought was musically very successful. Because we'll talk about the incidents in a minute, but this is the last one which I can really say I really love this album.
Everyone's a winner on this one, I think.
Yeah. And if you want guests, you've got some quite different sort of ones on here. You've got Alex Lifeson does the guitar solo from Rush.
Yeah, we love Alex.
But then you've also got the man Fripp on there, who some people watching this may have heard of. A little-known musician from the Southwest.
I would imagine if you've probably heard this YouTube channel or listened to our Daft Band, you probably have heard of Mr. Fripp, who is obviously a brilliant fella. So, this album, I think every track's a winner on this one, which is something perhaps the previous albums have had exceptional tracks, but with this one, it's got the whole album hangs together really well.
Yes,
you can hear the influence of Harrison Moore on it, because rhythmically it's hugely complicated. There's lots of interesting stuff going on here, and it's full metal. I mean, it's probably sort of pretty much full metal, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's much more metal than the previous ones.
Because they signed to Roadrunner, which is the leading metal label, I suppose. Roadrunner, and alongside Music for Nations and people like that. The title track, the first track, reminds me of almost Voivod. It's got that kind of progressive metal thing going. I love it. I think it's one of their. It's a very album that got me into Porcupine Tree. Well, basically, when people started talking to me about Porcupine Tree about 10 years ago, this was the album I listened to first. And I thought, oh, bloody yeah, this is that Voyage 34 band that I used to like. They've suddenly become Voivod or something. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe how this band had come so far and was doing this amazing stuff. It was, like you say, a contemporary of the Magic Mushroom Band and, that kind of Chumbawamba scene.
Like a sort of a good club band almost.
Yeah, but they were like part of that space rock, Chumbawamba, that kind of scene. You never would have thought Porcupine Tree would suddenly become a progressive, like actually progressive band, because prog rock isn't progressive. Prog rock is largely a nostalgia-based music to
yes,
it's
the style,
and yeah, it's a style. But this was actually progressive. This was an album that was a juxtaposition of Led Zeppelin's keyboard sounds and Voivod's chords and really complex rhythmic djenty drumming, but actual tunes as well, properly good tunes. Really,
that's the thing. I think that's the thing that distinguishes it from being just like sort of noisy rock music, is the fact that the tunes are so good. And Stephen Wilson can write a good tune.
Yeah,
that's one thing he's always been able to do.
And around that time, there was if you listen to bands like Pineapple Thief, they're a very good band. Anathema. There's bands that sort of came as an offshoot of this record, I think, and the previous two.
Oh yeah, kind of influential, basically.
It was really influential. That run of 3 albums was really like, I think, and there's lots of sort of tier 2, tier 3 prog metal bands that basically do this album, the previous 2, as a sort of knockoff, don't they?
Well, I know that. I mean, these aren't knockoffs, but I know that. For instance, Robin from Cosmograph.
Oh, Robin's awesome. Yeah,
loves this record and is a big fan. And then also Andy from DXPS.
Yeah.
There's even a song on the first DXPS song called P Tree.
Yeah, I mean, and you could also say, I mean, I've talked to Andy Tillotson about this as well, because he was kind of around at the same time, wasn't he? So
yes,
I don't think it was necessarily an influence on Andy. Yeah, I think Andy was right. I'd say Andy's a contemporary of Stephen Wilson's, isn't he?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think they were kind of even to the point, because Andy sort of came from the he was mates with the Chumbawamba guys, and he was mates with that. And Andy sort of comes from anarcho punk, believe it or not, and prog, which prog was something he loved from when he was a child. So he's grew up on prog. He's a phenomenal progressive rock musician, Andy. But Andy's very much a contemporary of Stephen Wilson. So I wouldn't say Andy was influencing, but there was people in the 90s and 2000s. There was Andy doing The Tangent. There was Spock's Beard. There was all those sort of bands. But as well, there was a bit more interest in that style of music, because it was a barren world, the prog world, for a long time, wasn't it? In the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, it started getting interesting again. Kind of for me, I think in the mid 2000s. When Porcupine Tree were sort of in this kind of era. You mentioned The Tangent. They were one of the ones that I picked up on their first album and thought that was
Andy's Parallel 90 Degrees. They were
Parallel 90 Degrees, which
very,
was more
very sort of similar sort of style, progressive metal and sort of
a bit more alt.
And they were good.
And then on the more sort of pure prog lines, you've got the sort of the Flower Kings and the Swedish prog movement.
And then your Opeths and people like that who were taking bits of progressive rock from metal. So
exactly,
I think what's really interesting about the 90s and 2000s is it was kind of prog, and there was bands like Spock's Beard that were doing trad prog. But also there was people doing stuff where they were going, well, yeah, we'll take a bit of Floyd and we'll take a bit of Crimson because we love that, but we're not going to do that again. We're going to try and do something different with it.
Yeah,
that's what's exciting. Not doing this sounds like Tell, this sounds like Genesis, because that's already been done. You're never going to be as good as them.
Yeah.
You'll never be better at King Crimson than Robert Fripp is. You're never going to be better at Genesis than Peter Gabriel is. But you can be yourself and make something really cool. And I think that's why this album is good, because it doesn't really sound like anybody else. It sounds like it is new and interesting, isn't it?
Ladies and gentlemen, that was a party political broadcast on behalf of the Proper Prog Party by Matt Stevens, member of Prog.
and one of the problems is traditional progressive rock fans, some of them are the most amazing, lovely people in the world. And they do want to hear new stuff. And I've met some of the coolest people in the world in Progland. But there are also people who don't, we don't want this changing. No.
Yeah.
I want my Mellotrons, and I want my, and I haven't really got a problem with it, because I'm the same with Bob Mould and things like that, when I want to hear stuff that sounds like that sound. But that attitude is never going to continue to genre fresh, because
it's not either or. You can have both. You can listen to your Genesis LP, and then you can listen to your Porcupine Tree LP, or your Stephen Wilson solo LP released last year.
I mean, to be fair on Stephen Wilson, he hasn't just carried on doing the same stuff, has he? He has, he did the solo albums he's done. He's not just carried on with the Porcupine Tree sound, because he could have remade those 3 Porcupine Tree albums over and over again. Yeah, had a nice little career doing that.
But he's not done that, and he's
full credit
in his solo careers. I think we mentioned when we were talking about the Future Bites. Yeah, he's traversed a real gamut of stuff. Yeah, he's done the full on prog thing with the Raven, and then sort of got more poppy as he's come on from there, and then produced a really great pop album last year.
I mean, I have to say, when the Raven first came out, I was very critical of that, because I thought that was the Red record. I thought, he's sold out. He's made a prog album, but listening back to it now, it's a really good album, and I really like the Raven now. And I think yes, it is a prog album, but also it's a really good prog album. Exactly, and he talks about the story of when he made it. He lost his dad, and I've been through some quite traumatic stuff in the last few years. And when you're going through traumatic stuff, you want stuff that's comforting and nostalgic. And for him, you could see that he made this nostalgic progressive rock album, but it's an album that's got a lot of emotional intensity to it. And a lot of progressive rock albums that are that kind of, it's a bit like Big B Train on the Underfall Yard when that brass comes in. It's magical. It's like, this is different. This is really, there's an emotional intensity to it. This is the real deal. So when it's done well, it's great. What I object to is the thing of people go, okay, I'm going to get my progressive rock album out last. Brilliant. Right, Nanotron, get your Nanotron out. Get me Twin Neck. And they haven't got any tunes, and they're not inspired. They're not upset. They're not putting any emotion into it. They're just knocking out this album for no apparent reason.
There are, unfortunately, a lot of bands like that. I mean, I won't name them to spare their blushes.
There are people who make great contemporary progressive rock albums like Stephen Wilson, Cosmograph, Big Big Train. There are people who do that, and I'm not being critical of those guys. But I'm just saying, it's like, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Doesn't mean you should. Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
and speaking of just because you can doesn't mean you should we talk about the incident?
No, the incident, right? Okay, so
just because you can make a 60-minute continuous piece of music doesn't mean you should.
I have to say, I've never actually finished the incident. I've listened to it twice. I've never managed to listen to it through in one go. There's an EP of stuff that was released at the same time that's really good. It's got I can't remember what it's called. It's got Bonnie the Cat on it. I can't remember what it's called.
So it also comes as a bonus CD with the incident,
which is really cool. I really like that. It's got some really good stuff on the bonus disc.
Yeah, there's like 4 songs I think on it.
I think that's stronger than. So my problem with the incident is it sounds like they've run out of energy a bit. They sound like they're a bit tired. There's a song that sounds like it's off Animals.
That's Time Flies, and that is just, that's insane. When that started off, it's dogs from Animals, and then later on you've got the guitar riff, which is sheep from Animals.
Yeah,
it's just, I'm sorry, that's derivative. It just is.
It just doesn't. It just. I really wanted to like it because I like Fear of Blank Blanket so much. It's such a great record, and then I was trying to. I came into the incident full on, I want to like this. I'm right. I can't wait for this. It's going to be exciting. And hearing it, I was, I don't get this. I seemed to listen to the whole thing and nothing seemed to put any hooks in.
There are some really nice bits. So like you'll hear a bit and then you'll get like sort of 15 to 30 seconds of, oh, that's interesting. And then it doesn't go anywhere.
I like the intro to Occam's Razor, that
right at the start, yeah.
I like that. I don't mind Time Flies, but it does sound like Pink Floyd.
It does.
I don't mind I Drive the Hearse, but I just don't get it. I don't get it.
I've hardly had it out of its case, I have to say.
I think I'd use the phrase "it's not aimed at me" because I'm not particularly big on long concept albums anyway. It's not my thing.
Actually, one thing I did do with it was when I bought it, I didn't realise that the version I got came with a surround sound disc, and at the time I didn't have the hardware to play them, and then of course later on we got just like a little home cinema system, which does 5.1. So the last time I listened to the incident was on that. It was just to sort of give it a try. And actually, it is interesting because you hear all these different sounds sort of whizzing about from different parts of the room.
I've never
but once you take that novelty away, yeah, probably not.
I mean, I don't know. I don't like to be disrespectful about it because I hugely admire the guys in the band. Hugely admire what they achieved. I think what they did was so. Because at the time they were the only, apart from Andy and Andy T, but there wasn't many people braving that world, and they were pioneers. They were out there on their own. They worked incredibly hard to build their career up. They
all
the frog and bucket gigs and all basically the same circuit I've done for the last 10 years with no success whatsoever.
Well,
they've done they did their 10,000 hours. They did the the tours. There's a story of them playing a classic rock society gig and things like that when they did all that stuff, didn't they?
Well, our mate James Allen still talks about the first time he saw them, which is right back in the early days. When there was it was like that whole business about the band talking about playing at the Skyline Lounge when the audience consisted of a drunk and a one-armed go-go dancer and a dog.
You let the dog in free. But yeah, they did that. And they worked so hard to. I did a few gigs with Colin Edwin when he was playing in Tim Bonus's band. Tim Bonus's band, and I was the opening act for it. He's a really nice guy, lovely chap. And he just said, and I asked him, how did you do it? Because I hugely admire what they did. And they were the hardest working band. And they basically built that audience from nothing, literally nothing, up to major label, selling out the Royal Albert Hall. I admire them so much. I think it's so brilliant what they did. And he just said they kept working. Yeah. Kept going round and round. And eventually they were playing to 30 people, 40 people, 30 people, 40. And eventually the ball started to... Well, they just kept going. He said the only advice he had for me was just to keep going. That was the one thing he said to me: keep going.
And sadly, I think that was probably the last time you could do that.
Well, I think now as well, there isn't a circuit to go around unless I think now the world's changed to the point where you have to build the audience online and then connect it up in the real world. So you build your fan base on socials, YouTube, whatever, all that stuff, and then you go and then you arrange for them to meet up in the real world, don't you?
Yeah.
How do you feel about BEM? Is it very much something that happens online, isn't it?
Oh, completely. We wouldn't operate without the internet. Primarily we sell online. The sort of the traditional way of doing things is very different, and that may work for the majors, but it wouldn't work for someone at sort of our level.
But as Porcupine Tree were coming up, the web was kind of a new thing, wasn't it? So
it was.
They came up with the internet, didn't they? So I remember it's like they had a MySpace, and we all had a MySpace at the time. They were a MySpace thing, but they worked. What I hugely admire about, I think Stephen Wilson's a hugely talented guy. I think all the guys in that band are really talented, actually. Really remarkable. Colin and Richard, and both drummers, they're really talented guys. And they're also Richard Thingy from Delirium Records, who managed
the guy who started the label.
Just to have that belief, just to say, right, okay, we've got a band that's playing to 30 people a night. Well, I think they could be as big as Pink Floyd. And that was that's that thing where to see a band in a pub playing to 30 people and go, you know what? One day they're going to sell out the Royal Albert Hall. That's vision, mate. That's hard.
Having that vision, yeah.
Whereas I don't know how you get a band from playing in a pub to playing in the Royal Albert Hall now. I don't know how it's one of the. It's so, like you say, at the time there was Pineapple Thief, who were contemporaries of them, and then sort of adopted that sort of a similar sound. They do it brilliantly, and Bruce is a hugely talented guy. But there was around that time there was the Andy T's band, The Tangent. And you had Pineapple Thief. There was those sort of bands about, and then there was sort of the Cardiacsy guys as well, and the.
Yes, they were still sort of around and doing stuff. I'm just kind of if we look at, say, I don't know, 2005, which was the album that Deadwing was released.
What were the contributors of it?
And I'll just sort of see what there was in terms of.
It was that world was. It wasn't like there was no prog magazine, was there?
No,
there was no. There's not a lot of internet. When did you start your podcast, David?
The podcast started in 2008.
So, I mean, I don't know if anyone watching this knows, but David's podcast, we were the most popular prog one of the most popular prog podcasts going.
The European Perspective, yeah. I mean, it's still got a few listeners.
No, it was, there wasn't anything like that, was there? There was no radio. There was DPRP and things like that. There was various sort of prog forums, but there was no infrastructure to support a band like Porcupine Tree. Is the point I'm making, was there?
No, there wasn't.
There was an infrastructure for metal bands like Metal Hammer. I mean, I know Kerrang and Metal Hammer used to review Porcupine Tree albums, but there was nothing for a band in that genre, was there?
No, I mean, I'm looking at 2005, and it's interesting. A lot of the big names, well, I say big-ish names that we know today, they just weren't around then.
So there was no big train, was there? There was no.
Big train was sort of kind of quiescent at that time. I mean, they were around,
but they weren't a big name within the scene. Well, Marillion,
no, they haven't. Obviously, they haven't come back. I mean, Marillion are a constant. Of course, they've always been doing things.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff that I was listening to, just sort of looking through my my music library here, a lot of it is not really that prog, to be honest with you.
But it wasn't, like I say, there wasn't a lot of that. Like Sandy T was doing the Tangent and Parallel 90 Degrees. I remember Andy said he played a lot of that circuit of bands at the time, and there was his band. What was band before Pineapple Thief? Unicorn something?
Vulgar Unicorn. Yeah,
there was his band, and they're all playing sort of classic rock society. They're playing. There's always sort of underground 70s revivalist sort of things, really. But
yes,
like I say, there was the best of those artists, like Andy and Bruce and Stephen Wilson, and people like that, weren't revivalists. They were trying to take it somewhere new, weren't they? They were trying to, and like Andy with the Tangent. I'll keep mentioning he's a mate of mine. He's a really talented guy, but he took prog and he's done different things with it, he's done lots of different sort of styles of that sort of music, hasn't he? The same as Stephen Wilson has. You know what I mean? I think the thing I most admire about them, there's two sorts of bands. There's bands that they're AC/DC bands who come up with a sound and carry on doing it for the rest of their career, and there's bands who move forward and try different things. And I think Porcupine Tree were very much one of those bands, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
And
I think there's space for both. As long as you're honest about your intent.
But listening to the first album and listening to the last album, there's virtually nothing in common, is there?
No, with that sort of band. With Porcupine Tree, yeah, definitely. They are different bands, really. The only thing that's similar is the voice, which you can't change. But of course, there's a lot less of the voice on the early stuff than the ones on the later stuff.
It's an Osricsy space rock dog on a bit of string sort of band.
Yeah.
And then you've got this sort of progressive metal sort of band that were playing Royal Albert Hall. So you've gone from a pub. I don't know anyone else who's achieved that within the progressive scene. Do you?
Not in the progressive zone. Opeth. They've played the Albert Hall.
Once Anathema, Marillion, but they're different sort of things because
Marillion have been around forever.
Marillion were a major in the 80s. And Anathema and Opeth come from Metal Land anyway. Metal Land's a different beast because
that's very true.
It's very much a different world. But like I say, I think so. All in all, what was your sort of feelings on Porcupine Tree's career?
Well, they made some really great music. Really, particularly the sort of middle period ones, which I really like. From a songwriting perspective, I think, as you've said, they developed their sound, and they've been very influential on a lot of modern progressive bands or bands on the prog scene. I also think that although lots of people bemoan the fact that Porcupine Tree no longer do anything, they no longer exist, I think they were absolutely right to stop doing what they did when they did, because I think on the last album, it showed that they were ready to do something else. Certainly, Stephen Wilson was ready to do something else.
Well, I must admit, I prefer Stephen Wilson's solo stuff to the last Porcupine Tree album.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And but it's like bands don't go on forever.
No, I don't think they should either. I think I think when we talked about King Crimson, almost one of the best things that Fripp knew how to do was stop. He knew when to stop, and I think Stephen Wilson knew when to stop as well. I mean, if he stopped "Our Fear Is a Blank Planet," it probably would have been the perfect career, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, the instance, it's not a bad album by any chance. I mean, it's by anyone else's standard, it's an excellent album. It's just that in context, it didn't really grab me. But
no.
I think, what an amazing career. What a thing to take a band from the pubs to the Royal Albert Hall to Radio City Music Hall in America to, from the smallest band in the world to really big cult following. I think they're inspirational in a career sense, they're inspirational in an attitude sense, and good on them. And I'm hugely admire what they did. So, and
absolutely,
and
agree 100%.
Are we done, David?
I think we might be done until we think of another subject.
We'll think of some more. All right, thanks so much.
Not be Opeth.
Yeah, we'll do Opeth. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much, mate.
Thank you, Matt. Nice to talk again.
Cheers, dude.